Hello! In this video we are going to create a custom keyboard, and we're going to do this using a panel. Now when I say custom keyboard, it doesn't necessarily have to be a keyboard as in a piano keyboard. I'm just talking about something that can visually display the notes that are coming into your plugin from the user, either via a MIDI controller or from a sequencer. So in this sense, a keyboard could be something sort of more abstract. It could just be like a collection of buttons, almost like a drum pad in any configuration you like. It could be a traditional piano keyboard. It could be a guitar fretboard. It could be the kind of button layout you get on an accordion. There's a broad range of the layout you could use for this. We are actually going to do it like a traditional keyboard, mainly for simplicity's sake. But I just want you to know that you can take this and use it in all kinds of different ways. I've got a very simple project set up here. It has a sine wave generator and an interface script, and that's it. So we'll go into the interface script. We've got our standard keyboard down here, the usual HISE one. Let's hide the API browser just so we have a bit more room to work with. And what we're going to do is, rather than using a floating tile and using the built-in HISE keyboard, we're going to use a panel and create our own keyboard. It's going to be rather simplistic. It's just to give you a sort of basic idea. So we're going to do a 1-octave keyboard. You can of course expand this to be a full-size keyboard or to cover whatever range you need to for your project. This will be based on a snippet I posted on the HISE forum a few weeks ago in response to a query there. But in this video we're going to build on top of that and make it a bit more fancy. So we'll just position this on the canvas. Let's have a look. Put that there. So we'll do something like that and we'll zoom in. And this is the frame within which we are going to create our keyboard. Let's rename this panel to PNL keyboard. And we'll grab a reference to this panel by right-clicking on it in the component list and selecting create script variable definition. And then we'll just paste that into our script over here. And another thing we can do, if we scroll down in the property editor, we're going to change this allow callbacks setting to all callbacks. So that will give us access to all of the various mouse callbacks for this panel, such as mouse down, mouse over, hover, drag, that kind of thing. Okay, so that's great. We've got a blank panel. Now we're going to paint it. So we're going to create a paint routine. So name of the panel, set paint routine. And then we give it a function with G as the parameter. G is the graphics object. And now we're ready to paint our panel. Now to start with, we're just going to fill the panel in completely black. So we'll do G.fillAll, and then we have to give it a color. So for black, we'll do 0xFF, and then it's 6 zeros. And if I hit F5 on this, we'll see the panel goes black there. And to keep it simple, we're just going to do columns for the keys. We're not going to actually have it like a traditional piano keyboard where you've got the black key sort of set back from the white key. We'll just have it as a zebra crossing type look, but you can change this in your own version to look like whatever you want it to look like, just to adjust the paint routine accordingly. So to decide which keys are going to be the white keys, we're just going to do this with an array. There are various ways we could do this, but because we're just doing a 12-note keyboard, an array just is going to make this a bit simpler. So we're going to write var white. We're using a var declaration here rather than a reg or a local because we're inside the paint routine. And this is going to be an array. And we're just going to put the number of the keys that we want to be white. So the first one, assuming we're going to have, let's say C is going to be note 0, and then the B above that will be note 12. So that's our 12-note piano. So C is going to be 0. So we'll put 0 will be white. And then of course C sharp, which is 1, that's going to be black, so we can skip that out. So 2 will be white, that's going to be D. D sharp, E, so that'll be 4. F, 5. G is the next one, so that'll be 7. And then A is 9. And then B is 11. So now we're going to have a loop. And in this loop, we're going to go from 0 to 11. So that's for each of our 12 keys. And within our panel, we're going to draw a rectangle that is 1/12 the width of the panel. So that'll give us 12 equal rectangles to represent the different keys. And if the number of the key is one of our white keys, then we'll set the color of the rectangle to white. And if it's not a white key, we'll set the color to black. So let's write that loop. So there's our loop, nice and simple. And now we just have to do a check to see if the key, which in this case is I, is one of the numbers in our array. And if it is, we set the color to white. If it isn't, we set it to black. So to do that, to check if our white array contains the value of I, we say if white.contains I, then we set the color to white. So we do g.setColor. And we can set colors in two ways. We can use the hex value as I did already up here, or we can actually use the colors constant. So let's use that. So we just type colors dot hit escape, and then we get access to all these different colors. And we're just going to type white. I think it's called white. There we go, white. And we'll use that rather than writing the hex value. And then we'll put else. So if it's a black key, and we'll do the same thing here, but we'll set the color to black. So now all we've got to do is draw our rectangle within our panel. And the X value of our rectangle, the left edge of it, is going to be related to the number of the key. So if it's the first key, then the left edge is going to match the left edge of our panel. If it's the second key, it's going to be one key's width, which will be 1/12 of the whole panel inwards. And then for the third one, it'll be about there. For the fourth one, it'll be about there, etc. So let's draw that. So we'll do g.fillRect. And then we have to give it the area. So it needs the X, the Y, the width, and the height. We'll fill the height in first because that's really simple. It's just the height of the panel. So this.getHeight. And remember that the keyword this, when we're inside a paint routine, refers to the panel that the paint routine belongs to. So this is the same as writing PNL keyboard because we're in PNL keyboard's paint routine. The Y position is also easy. That's just going to be 0 because we're always starting at the top. It's always going to go from the top of the panel to the bottom of the panel. So 0 and height, they're easy to set. The width is going to be the panel's width. So this.getWidth divided by 12 because we've got 12 rectangles to fit here, 12 keys. And X is going to be the same thing, but we want to shift it over by whatever number key we're up to. So we basically need to multiply it by I. So we'll write this.getWidth divided by 12, and then actually at the beginning of this, before the word this, we'll do I times. So the first time through, I is going to equal 0, which is the left edge. The second time through, it'll equal 1/12. The third time through, it'll be 2/12 of the full width, and so on. And hopefully, let's just delete those extra spaces there. Hopefully, if I've done this right, I should hit F5 and we should get a zebra crossing style keyboard. There we go. And of course, like I say, we're doing this with the keys all the same length. But if you were wanting to get this more like a traditional keyboard, you just have to adjust this height value for when the keys are black. And you can hopefully figure out how to do that just by putting it in this within this if statement here. So we could adjust it. If we wanted shorter keys, we could do like minus 50, for example, and we get shorter keys. And actually, because we're colouring in the keys black here, I actually don't need that fill all thing anymore at the top, so we'll just get rid of that. Okay, and that's our basic keyboard layout. Now, of course, it doesn't do anything yet. We have to make it so we can click these buttons and do things with them. So to do that, we're going to need a mouse callback. So the mouse callback is similar to how we set up the paint routine. We're going to write PNL keyboard.set mouse callback. And we'll give it a function, but this time the parameter is called event, which is going to give us some information about the mouse callback. And we're going to start off with a simple one. So we'll say, if the mouse is clicked, what do we want it to do? We want it to trigger a note. And then if the mouse is released, we want it to stop the note. And let's make two separate functions actually for that to sort of keep things a bit more organized. So we'll have one function here called play note, and it will take a note number. And we'll have another function here called stop note, which will also take a note number. The next thing we're going to do is fill in these two functions, but before we do that, we need to talk a little bit about what we're going to use to play the note. So we're going to use the synth play note function, this one here, play note, and this returns an integer, which is actually an event ID. And we need that ID so that after a note has been played, we can keep track of it and we can turn the note off at a later point. So we're going to need somewhere to store the ID of the note that's played. Now we could use an array, and in this instance it probably would be fine to use an array because we only have 12 keys, but we're going to use a MIDI list instead. So a MIDI list is very much like an array, but it's more specialized. First of all, it has a set number of elements. It has 128 elements to match the MIDI standard of 128 values. And it can only store numbers. You can try putting letters in it and arrays and objects and things, but it won't work. You'll just get the value 0. It's only designed to store integers. And the advantage of using a MIDI list over an array is when you do use a MIDI list for the purpose it's intended for, it's faster than using an array because it's got these optimizations built in because it's dedicated for a specific task. Now we're only going to be using 12 of the elements in our MIDI list because of the size of our keyboard here, but if you had a full-size keyboard, obviously you'd use all 128 elements. So we'll declare our MIDI list, and we'll call our MIDI list event IDs, and to declare it we type engine.create MIDI list. And the MIDI list has some dedicated functions. So we've got clear, fill, get index, get value, set value, and a few others. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fill this MIDI list with a known value that tells us if an element is empty. Now in a few projects I've used this technique and I used the value -1 to indicate an empty element, and that ended up causing some problems because if you pass that to the note off function, it does an all notes off kind of thing. So don't use -1. Use something else. I use -99. So we're going to do event IDs.fill -99, and that's just to tell us that if we find an element and it's got the value -99 in it, we know that there is no ID set for that element. Okay, so now we're ready to write our play note and stop note functions. So play note is going to use the synth.playNote function, and for the note number we're getting that from this n value here that we're passing in, so that's going to be n, and for the velocity we'll just set this to 64. We could have the velocity based on where we click on the keyboard, but just for simplicity's sake we're just going to leave that at 64. Now we need to store the value that this returns, which is the note ID, inside our event IDs MIDI list. And with an array you'd do something like event IDs.push, and then you'd assign the value that way. With MIDI lists it's a little different. You have to use set value, And in the brackets, the first value you have to give it is the element number, so 0 to 128. And then the second value you give it is the actual value you want to assign. So the element number we're going to use is the key that was pressed, so that's N. And the value we want to put in is the event ID, which we're getting from here, so we can just stick this function directly in there. So now we're storing the event ID for a given note inside the event ID's MIDI list, and we're assigning it to the element that matches that note. For example, if middle C triggered this function, then N would be 60. So in our event ID's MIDI list at element 60, we would store the note ID for middle C. Okay, now we're going to turn the note off. So again, we're going to use the synth module for this. So we're going to write synth dot note off by event ID, and then we give it the event ID. So we call our event ID's MIDI list again, and we go get value, and this time we just pass it the element number where the ID is stored, so that's going to be N. There are a couple of other things we should do here when we turn the note off. Firstly, we shouldn't just turn the note off without first checking that the note is actually there to be turned off, because there are occasions when notes can be turned off in other parts of the script, and then it will get to this function, we'll pass it a note ID, and it'll say, sorry, that note ID doesn't exist, and it'll throw an error. So first of all, we check that that note ID is actually there. So we'll write if event IDs.getValue and pass in N again is not equal to -99. So that's why up here we filled it all with -99. Then when it's set here, it's changed. It's no longer -99. So we can check at this point. If it is -99, then obviously there isn't a note. And if it isn't, then there's a note and we can turn it off. And then once we turn the note off, we have to set this back to being -99. So we're going to do event IDs.setValue, pass in N as the element number, and then -99 as the value. And that solves that issue. So when there's no note, it'll be -99. When there is a note, it will be whatever the note ID is. It'll be something else. Okay, so now we can go back to our set mouse callback function. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find out which of the keys the mouse is over when there is an event that triggers the mouse callback. So to do that, we'll create a variable. Again, we're using var because we're inside a mouse callback. And just like when we were inside the paint routine, we use var for our array. And we'll call this key because this will be the key that the mouse is over when the callback is triggered. And this is going to be equal to the mouse's current position on the x-axis, which we get using event.x, and event comes from this parameter here, which we'll then divide by the width of the panel, so this.getWidth, and then we'll times it by 12, which is the number of keys we've got, and that's the number of divisions we've made in our panel. And to make sure we always get an integer back, because we don't want to get, like, if the mouse is sort of halfway over a key, we'll get like key 1.5 or something. We want to make sure we get an integer. So we're just going to write parse int and wrap that little calculation there inside that function. And that will always give us a single integer value. And we can just see that if we print that to the console. And I'll just clear out the console here and I'll hit compile. So when I hover the mouse over now, so we're on 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up. So now we've got a key number and we can now check if the mouse is clicked. So we'll say if event.clicked. What we want to do is play the note. So we're going to call our play note function and we'll write play note and we're going to pass in the key. Right, so I'll demonstrate this now. I'll hit compile. Now we're not really going to hear anything because when I hit the first key here, it's going to play note 0, MIDI note 0, which is really low down. So it's just going to be like a sort of hissing sound, if anything. And also we haven't got a note off yet, so it's just going to play indefinitely. So I'll click the panic button up here to turn the note off, but I'll demonstrate it anyway. So we can't really hear anything. So what we have to do, I want this note to be middle C, basically. I want our octave to start at middle C. So we just have to add on to our note value here in the play note function to get our keyboard to start at middle C. We're just adding an offset basically. And what we need to do is just add 60 to it because middle C is MIDI note 60. Okay, so now I'll click one of these notes, we'll hear it play. Again, we haven't got the note off, so it's just going to ring out until I click the panic button. Again, we haven't got the note off, so it's just going to ring out until I click the panic button. Alright, so that's the start of our keyboard. Now let's implement the note off. So this is going to be on the mouse up event, so we'll say if event.mouseUp stop note, and we'll pass in N, and I'll hit F5 on that. So now I should be able to click and release, and it should play the note and then turn it off. Oh, we've got an error there, let's see what's going on. Line 40. Oh, okay, I put in N here, I should have put key. There we go. Unknown function get value, line 41. Yeah, I misspelled event IDs there. I put events IDs. Let's get rid of that. Hit F5, third time lucky. Right, so we'll clear out the console. The next thing to do is to actually indicate visually which key we've clicked, because currently they don't change at all. So in our mouse callback, what we'll do is we'll set the value of the panel to the number of the key that was clicked. So it'll be this.setValue equals key, and then we'll call the repaint on the panel so it'll repaint it. And now in our paint routine, we're going to put a little check in here to see if the value of I matches the value of the key that was pressed, and if it does, it can colour it differently. And we can use the ternary operator for this. So I'll show you how that works sort of longhand, and then we'll do it shorthand. So we'll say if I equals this.getValue, so the value of the number of the key that was pressed. Then we want to set the colour to, let's see, what do we have here? We've got transparent, we've got antique white. So if it's a white key, we'll set it to antique white. And then we can put else, just set it to the white that we've been using. So this is the longhand version, and this should work if I remember to put semicolons in. Now at the moment, this is actually going to highlight the key when I hover the mouse over the panel. See that? And it's only working for the white keys because we've put it in inside this if statement. But can you see how it's working when we hover? So what we need to do is we want it to do that when we click. And let me see. So the best way to do this would be inside this if statement. We can say and event IDs dot get value I does not equal -99. So we're seeing if that key has been clicked and is active. I think that will work. So now if I click a key, we should see that. And I said we could make this a bit simpler using the ternary operator, although now this is a longer if statement than I was expecting, so maybe that won't work, but let's see. So we do it like this. And then for the else, we can just put a colon. And then just pressing the delete key here. Okay, so this is another way to write that if statement on a single line, but I'm not sure it's easier to read, to be honest. And maybe it is, but that's a way to do it on a single line. I think we'll keep the more verbose version. So we'll keep the longer version just because I think it's easier to see what's going on. And then for the black keys, we want to do exactly the same thing. Except I'll get rid of that. Instead of antique white, we'll have something like a grey, something like that. Let's see, what do we have? Dark grey, maybe that will do. And then obviously we want black there instead of white. And now that these are longer if statements, we'll just put some semicolons around there. I don't think they're actually necessary, but it will just make it a bit easier to see what's going on. Okay, so I'll hit F5 and hopefully this will work. So now when I click the black keys, they should go sort of grey colour. So there I just demonstrated a little bug we've got. Well, it's not a bug yet, it's a missing feature. But if I click on one of these keys and then move the mouse to another key, when I release it, it doesn't, because the cursor is over a different key to the one that triggered it, it doesn't turn off the note. So I have to click on it again. So what would be ideal is if we click and move the mouse, is it turns off the previous note and then plays the one that the mouse is currently over, so we can sort of drag up and down the keyboard like this. So that's what we'll go for now. So back in our mouse callback, we're going to have another if statement. We're going to say if event.drag, and then we want to find out what the last key was that was pressed, and that will be the value of the panel. We can say var last key equals this.getValue, and then we can say if the current key, the one that we're already on, is not the same as the last key, so that means the mouse has moved to a different key, then what we want to do is stop the last key. So stop note last key and play the new key, play note key. And I think that'll work, so I'll hit compile here and we'll click and drag the mouse around. Yeah, that works. We've got like a little sort of stylophone type thing now. And it carries on playing when I go off the keyboard because we haven't put any boundaries in for the X position. So maybe we should do that now. So for the play note, we don't want it to play when we go beyond the two ends of the keyboard. And that's caused some horrible problems, so we definitely don't want it to do that. And the way we can solve that is we can just check the where the mouse is and make sure it's not below this end or above that end. So probably the best place to put this actually is right at the top here. Yeah, I think this will work. So within our mouse callbacks, we'll say if event.x is greater than or equal to 0, so that's the left side of the panel, and event.x is less than or equal to the width of the panel, so the right hand side, then we'll do all the stuff that we've already written. So we'll just wrap this whole thing within that if statement, and I think that will solve that problem. So we'll hit F5 here. Yeah, so that works. For now, that solves that problem, and we can move on to the next bit. So what we can do now is we can actually have a hover event as well. So when we hover the mouse over, we'll change the color of the keys. So we'll go back to the mouse callback. We'll add another if statement, if event.hover, and then we're going to set a data property of the panel to the value of the hover event. So all panels have an object called data, which you can put in any data you like. So we'll call this one this.data.hover. So we're adding this hover thing. We could call it anything we want. We could call it ice cream. It doesn't matter. It's a value that goes within this data object that's already predefined. So we'll call it hover. and it's going to equal event.hover, which will be either 1 or 0 depending on if the mouse is hovering over the keyboard or not. And now in our paint routine, we can say if this.data.hover, we can put equals 1 if we wanted to, but just doing it like that automatically defaults to does it equal 1 or 0. So if that and I equals this.getValue, so we're over the correct one, and it's not pressed, because if it's pressed we've already determined what color we want to set it to if it's pressed, so we've got to make sure it's not pressed. So we've got to say and event IDs.getValue I is -99, so it's not pressed. So if all that is true, then we'll set the color to, what should we set it to? Colors dot Alice Blue. Let's try Alice Blue. And this will affect the black keys as well as the white keys because I haven't separated it, but that's fine. What's that, line 27? Oh, so I need to put another and in there. Oh no, we've lost our keyboard. Oh, okay, that should be 2 equal signs. There we are. And yep, so I don't like Alice Blue. It looks white to me, so let's change that. Let's see what else we've got. Cornflower Blue. Okay, let's try that. There we go. So now we've got highlighting, and then when we click, it changes. Okay, great, so that works. Right, so we're almost done here. The only thing we haven't done is if we actually play on a MIDI keyboard, the keys on our visual keyboard don't do anything. All we have to do now is rig up the on note on and the on note off callbacks to our keyboard so that when we play on a MIDI keyboard or MIDI data comes in from the outside world, it will affect the keyboard in the same way our mouse does currently to show which keys are being pressed. So we'll go to the on note callback. We'll open that in a new tab. So we've got on note on, and over here we'll have on note off. And all we have to do is populate the event ID's MIDI list with the ID of the note that was triggered. So we can write event IDs.set value, and we'll need the note number in here, so that's message.get note number. But of course our keyboard doesn't start at note 60, for example. If I was to press middle C on my keyboard, this would come in at note 60. We would want to translate that to note 0. And to do that, we just use the modulo operator and type 60. And then we need to give it the event ID, which is just message.get event ID. And then we repaint the panel. Okay, so now if I press a note on the keyboard, for example, I press middle C, which will translate to note 0, it should light up the first key on our keyboard. So it only lit on the release for some reason. I'm not sure why that is, but we can look into that. Now if I press another key, I don't think it's actually going to work, so we'll press D. So yeah, so that didn't work, and the reason is when we were clicking with the mouse, only one note can be active at a time, right? We can only click one note at a time. But with the keyboard, we can have multiple notes. So whereas when we were clicking with the mouse, we were using this set value thing, we have to just rely on the event ID being set when we're using the keyboard. So that means up here in our paint routine, we can get rid of this I equals this.getValue. In fact, we probably didn't even need that for the mouse version, to be honest. So we can get rid of that line. And I think that should, we'll leave it for the hover actually, because the hover is only one key, and I think that will solve that. So we haven't got the note off yet, so that's why they're staying the same color. And now we'll do the note off part. So if we go to the on note off callback, we can just copy and paste the on note on callback, but for the event ID, we'll just set that back to -99. Now there's a bit of a delay with this, I'm not 100% sure why that is. Oh, it could be because we're doing repainting in the audio thread. This is the real-time thread, the note off and the note on, those are the MIDI threads, so those are real-time. And we're doing the repainting in those, which is generally not a good idea because you're going to end up causing dropouts and things, or you can do. So what we need to do is defer our script so that everything happens in the non-real-time thread. So we'll do synth.defer callbacks, true, hit F5, and hopefully that will solve that lag. Yeah, there we go. So now it's instantaneous. So by using the mod 60 thing we've got here, that will map from MIDI note 60, that will equal 0, so it'll count up from there. I'll just output this so you can see what it's doing exactly. So if we just copy this, and we'll do console.print, and I'll hit F5, and I'm going to play MIDI note 60 now, so middle C, and it comes out as 0. If I play D, we get 2. If I play E, we'll get 4, and so on. Now once I get to B, which is 11, I'll go to the next C, which is going to be 12, and that goes beyond the range of our keyboard, so we won't see anything visual there. If I go below middle C, it's going to be below 60, so we'll get, well, you'll see, get 59, 58, 57, 56, etc. Now, one thing we can do is if we go beyond the range of our keyboard, you can see the colour of the hovered key is sticking. So let's get rid of that. All we have to do is in our mouse callback, we're checking here if we're in the left to right range of the keyboard. So we can say else. So that means we're not in the left to right range. We set this.data.hover to equal false because we're no longer inside that. And we'll change this, we'll move this repaint call just to outside both of those. So we'll just call that there. We'll hit F5. And now that problem goes away. Now if we move the mouse up, we've still got the problem because we haven't checked the top to bottom value. We've only checked the left to right. So we just do the same thing. So we'll say if event.y is greater than, is less than or equal to 0 in this case, or event.y is greater than or equal to this.getHeight. So if we're beyond the bounds of our keyboard panel, then again we want to turn hovering off. So we go this.data.hover equals false. I'll hit F5 again. And now that problem is solved. And I think that's about it. So this is quite a simple little keyboard. I know it's taken us quite a while to go through it, but once you get these principles down, it's fairly simple. I mean, all we've got is a paint routine, a mouse callback, a bunch of events, and a couple of functions to turn notes on and off. I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them below the video. For my Patreon supporters, I'll be posting this project to Patreon alongside the video, so if you're in the appropriate tier, you'll be able to download this project as well and use this as a jumping off point. If you're not following me on Patreon and you'd like to, I greatly appreciate your support. There is a link below the video on YouTube, so please check that out. Even if you're not following me on Patreon but you'd like a little jump start with this project, there is the snippet I mentioned earlier on the HISE forum, and I'll put a link to that forum thread in the video description as well, and you can go to that and the snippet is available there, as well as some other general discussion about customizing keyboards in HISE. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.